This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. So one thing I noticed that while I was editing that I didn't add into this video that I really do want to add into this video is a small conversation about where Nick Chubb might be in his rehab. It's been very quiet and I have no idea what the timetables are supposed to look like for Nick Chubb. I know they said they expect him to be back at the start of this next season, but I think they're also building up insurance to make sure that, hey, if something does go wrong, that they're set up, ready to go. Now, I don't think this is a direct condemnation that like Nick Chubb won't be back by the start of the season and that we should all start to panic. I think the Browns are just cautious like this because all signs point to Deshaun Watson moving through his rehab pretty well, but still the team went out and got high-powered backups and not just Jameis Winston, but Tyler Huntley to go along with DTR, who they spent a 5th-round draft pick on last year. So they spent a good amount of resources on backup quarterback just because Deshaun Watson went out for the season last year as insurance. And they're doing the same thing with running back right now, where they brought in Naheem Hines, they brought in Foreman. You already have Jerome Ford. We'll see if they do anything in the draft. And it brings up this question of like, where is Nick Chubb on his injury rehab, especially since, predictably enough, we've heard virtually nothing from Nick Chubb about where he is on this. I think the last thing that we heard was like an anecdotal story from Andrew Berry about how Nick Chubb was walking faster than people expected him to be able to walk after the injury, but obviously walking, running for like real, and then playing football and cutting are completely different things and different processes. So I have no idea where Nick Chubb is, and I don't know if this says anything positive or negative because I don't think that the Browns, even if this weren't even a major ACL injury and you expected Nick Chubb to be back for spring like they expect Deshaun Watson to, right? Even if it were that level of injury, I think the Browns would take the extra precaution because that seems to be how they operate. So I don't know if this says much about where Nick Chubb is. But, as we get closer and closer to spring, right, as we get closer to the OTA periods and the offseason training stuff, that's going to be something to look out for. Like, what is the timetable for Nick Chubb? I am honestly at a place where I wouldn't be surprised with any news. Like if they told me he was going to be out till week 4, I wouldn't be surprised. If they told me that Nick Chubb was going to be ready to go full contact for the start of camp, I wouldn't be surprised. Like I have no idea what to expect for this injury with Nick Chubb. And I think that's something that we've kind of just not talked about all off season is what is the timeline for Nick Chubb? Because I do think that matters, right? If he gets back for camp, and I think that's a very aggressive estimate, but if he does get back for camp, that completely changes how you operate for the season because you feel like he can be back ready to go and be some version of himself by week 1. But if he's not ready to practice until September, then we're talking about maybe a 4-8 week period where they just have Foreman, they have Jerome Ford on the roster, and Naheem Hines or whoever it is until they bring back Nick Chubb off the PUP list, and then they make a decision after that. Like, I don't really know what to expect with this Nick Chubb thing, and I'm just saying keep an eye out for an update on this whole situation because I think that will really clear some things up as far as the questions that we have about the running back room and the concerns that we have about the running back room. because Nick Chubb, obviously the most important part. But I just wanted to make sure we talked about the Nick Chubb injury in this video before we even got to like Donta Foreman and what that means in that pickup. So this part's done. Future Quincy is out of here. Let's go back to past Quincy talking about Devonta Foreman. It's funny how fast things can change. Just this morning, I was doing a video about how we learned that Jerome Ford might be safe based on the lack of moves that the Browns have made a running back. Like they brought in Naheem Hines, who's really here to compete with James Prochet when it comes to the return man job. But as far as bringing in somebody to hold down the backup responsibilities in case Nick Chubb can't be back in 100% by week 1, they haven't brought in anybody until about 2 o'clock today, where the Browns brought in Donta Foreman, my bad, a former University of Texas running back. And I, off rip, like this move. I've always liked Donta Foreman, especially him coming out of Texas. I thought he did an excellent job that year. He had to back up Derrick Henry. He spent a year as one of the feature backs in Carolina, where he almost got 1,000 yards. Pretty consistently throughout his career, he's been at or above 4.2 yards a carry. And to me, that is the measuring stick for like what a starting running back or somebody who can take starting running back carries can be, right? It's about 4.2 yards per carry. Now, last year didn't fare as well. Averaged about 3.9 yards a carry. You do worry he's turning 28, right? He's not super young anymore. Hasn't taken as many hits, but I've talked about this on this channel. You age anyways, whether you take hits or not. So I don't really factor that into whether a player has aged or not. I'm pretty sure us in the audience have aged quite significantly, despite the fact that we haven't been in the NFL the last few years. So I don't really factor in how many attempts he's gotten into what his age is. I factor in what his age is to what his age is. But big running back, 6 foot, 235 pounds. I think that's important because one of the biggest issues I think Jerome Ford had when it came to his up and down track record of success in 2023 was the fact that Jerome Ford is not that big of a back for an NFL running back. Now, what I mean by this, and if you've ever been to training camp, you might know what I'm talking about, right? But I remember my first time being at Browns camp, and I saw the running backs. It was like Nick Chubb, it was Kareem Hunt, I believe Dearness Johnson was still on the team, and Jerome Ford. And you see Nick Chubb run by you, and he's giant. And then you see Kareem Hunt run by you, and he's giant. And then you see Dearness Johnson run by you, and he's a big guy. And then you see Jerome Ford, and you're like, oh, he's clearly slighter than the rest of these guys. He's listed at about 210 pounds, which is like a full 20, 25 pounds less than Donta Foreman, and about 20, 25 pounds less than like Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb. And when you run the style that the Browns have ran, you want to be a heavier back. I think Jerome Ford is better off when he can be an accent to your running game, right? He can receive and he can block and he can do third down running back stuff. But what he's not going to be is your starter. And when you put Jerome Ford in a position to start, that's where he struggles the most, because when you give him 15, 16 carries a game, teams can start to key in on him. And if you get to Jerome Ford before he can find a gap, he's pretty much done for because he's not big enough to break tackles on an NFL level. So this is an interesting move to see where they do with Jerome Ford. I know a lot of people think that this means that Jerome Ford might get cut. I don't know if I go that far. I think the Browns are still going to need a third down back, right? If Nick Chubb is getting limited carries, Donta Foreman might be somebody who could step in and start if Nick Chubb can't play, but also take some of Nick Chubb's carries while Nick Chubb works back from this ACL, MCL tear that he had in week 2 of 23. And Jerome Ford, I think he's pretty locked in as the third down running back. Now, I've talked to Jack Duffin about this. Jack doesn't think they're going to keep 4 running backs. I think if they keep Nyheim Hines and he wins that competition over James Prochet, then they'll keep 4 running backs and 5 wide receivers, because I just don't see a world where they cut Jerome Ford to keep Michael Woods on the team. And I think that's just kind of number fulfillment at that point. So I think Jerome Ford's pretty safe because he's the only running back that they have that can do those third down responsibilities. Pierre Strong, I think this is one that kind of wipes him off of the roster. Now, I don't know if people assume that Pierre Strong really had a spot on the roster, but I think this move pretty much wipes him out because Pierre Strong has the same issues that Jerome Ford has, where he can't really break a tackle to save his life, and that leads him to kind of getting tackled behind the line of scrimmage a ton. And if you look at Jerome Ford's pass blocking numbers, they're not super great. The receiving numbers, he did not have consistent hands. Some potential there with him, but I don't think it's going to be fulfilled with the Cleveland Browns. I think Jerome Ford, he's still a really solid third down running back, right? Very good receiver out the backfield. He's a good runner. Like, he has that home run hitting ability. He's just not an every down runner. And he's a good pass blocker. And he's good in run block situations if you want to do some of that stuff with Deshaun Watson. I think there's a role for Jerome Ford on the team. I just don't think that role is starter. And I thought that the starter role wasn't something that should go for him. I think that Donta Foreman is somebody they're bringing in, kind of like how they used to use Dearness Johnson, right? Where if Nick Chubb or Kareem Hunt got hurt, right, then that's where you would see Dearness kind of step up. But Dearness wasn't necessarily a third down running back. Like when Nick Chubb got hurt in 2020, Dearness stepped in and took Nick Chubb's carries despite the fact that you still had Kareem Hunt. So you can have Kareem Hunt still in his role. I think that's what the Browns are going to do here. I think they're going to run a 3 running back rotation that's going to have Jerome Ford. It's going to have Donta Foreman, and that's going to have, hopefully, a healthy Nick Chubb added to it. And I think that's going to be what makes up their running back rotation. We'll see if Nyheim Hines beats out James Prochet. And if that happens at the return position, how does that change things? But also, the fact that they brought back James Prochet tells me that Nyheim Hines making the roster, I don't feel like is that much of a guarantee. The money might say something different. I don't know the specific details of Nyheim Hines' contract. I'm assuming it's a vet minimum deal. And if that's the case, then those are deals that you can move off of pretty easily. But it's going to be interesting to see how this running back room shapes out. But the Browns get Donta Foreman. I really like the move. I think he's somebody who can hold it down, be somebody who can get 20 carries. And if you use Donta Foreman with Jerome Ford as like a backup, I think that's a really good spot for Jerome Ford. And I think you'll have a more productive running game. I think the biggest issue with the Browns run game last year was that there was no 3-down back in that rotation. Like, you had a bunch of 1-down backs, right? You had a 3rd down back in Jerome Ford. You had another 3rd down back in Pierre Strong. And then you had Kareem Hunt, who's a short yardage back, but you didn't have anybody who was a 3-down back, right? I think last year, we really missed the presence of like a Dearness Johnson, like somebody who could take 20 carries and adjust to the game. And maybe he doesn't get a bunch of explosive plays, but he gets a bunch, like just 4 or 5 yards on the carry, right? And I think that's what Donta Foreman brings to this running back room is like, hey, if Nick Chubb is not going to be able to be the feature back for parts of the season, or at least at the beginning part of the season, then Donta can step up and fill that role. But if Nick Chubb is ready to go 100% and he's full go, then Donta's role gets smaller. I think Jerome Ford's role stays the same. We'll see. I could be wrong on this. Maybe they think Nyheim Hines can be a 3rd down back. I just don't see them giving up on a 3rd round pick that had 800 yards. And look, he didn't have promise as a feature back, but he certainly does have promise as some type of running back in the NFL. Showed some skill at pass blocking, showed some skill at receiving the ball, and completely just cutting him just to keep a Naheem Hines on the roster, or just to keep Michael Woods, a 7th round pick who hasn't really done anything for the Browns yet, on the roster. I don't see that as making much sense to me, for the Browns to get off of Ford, because I know that the perception of him is not great right now, but I also think that the perception of him is much lower than the reality of him. Like, he's a fine every other down running back, but I just don't think he's a every down running back. And I think there's room for a player like Jerome Ford on the Cleveland Browns. I mean, this guy was responsible for a lot of the most explosive plays of the season. He broke off a lot of big runs. He has that big playability, and I think the Browns want to keep that in their run game. I just think they also realize they need an every down back just in case Nick Chubb can't hold it down from an injury standpoint. But that's my thoughts on this Not to Foreman signing. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have a better night. Peace.